Hello everyone. This is the second screencast on Blake's poems. This one takes a look at The Little Girl Found. You need to watch the first screencast on The Little Girl Lost before this one if you haven't already. As before, please could you take some time to read the poem, pausing the screencast if you need to in order to do that. So we now see the story presented in The Little Girl Lost from her parents' perspective. And we know from the first poem that they see her as lost. Now, if we have a look at this slide, the lexis that I've marked in red presents us with Leica's parents' experience of the world, the way that they see the world. So we have the noun woe used twice here to emphasise their pain. And I think it's interesting how Blake uses sound in these stanzas to reinforce the agony that her parents are experiencing. So we have lots of examples where the vowel sounds are used to stretch out the word. In weep and hoarse and moan, for example, really hard to say those words quickly. So we could say that Blake is onomatopoeically creating the sense of unending pain, something which is also emphasised, of course, with the opening adverbial, all the night. And we're told here that Leica's parents have been looking for her for 7 days. Now, 7 was also a number used in the first poem when we were told that Leica was 7 years old. And of course, in itself is a number that we might associate with the Christian tradition, with the idea that God created the world within 7 days. So the next few stanzas give us a great insight into what Leica's parents assume about her fate. And what they assume tells us a lot about their assumptions of the world, of course. So we're told that they dream they see her and that they are led through the desert by an image of her. And these images of her confirm to them that she is in danger. And we can see this through the adjectives used, such as famished, weeping, weep, presented here, of course, as a list to create the sense of how overwhelmingly terrible her fate is. These adjectives give us a world of nightmares. All of her parents' worst fears are revealed through their vision of what has happened to her. Of course, these adjectives also describe their own condition and not Leica's, as we know. Like Leica, her parents are also on a journey, a metaphorical one as well as a literal one, where they will learn how to see the world differently. So just as her parents are on the verge of exhaustion and perhaps at the limit of what they can endure, they meet the lion that we previously met in the first poem. What Blake now presents us with is how the parents initially see the lion based on their expectations of what a lion is and what a lion will do to them, which is then subverted by what the lion actually does, which then leads to a transformation in the way that the parents see the lion and therefore the world. So we have the lexis marked in red showing the parents' fear that they must have learned from somewhere, perhaps their own parents. And we see how their perception of the lion is completely shaped by what they expect of him. So the verbs used such as couching, bore them, stalked, smelling, these are all verbs which bring with them a sense of threat. And the way that his mane is pre-modified by heavy also is a way of suggesting a sense of power and perhaps masculinity. All of which feeds into their assumptions of this lion as a predator who perhaps is likely to kill them. But then if we look at what the lion actually does, so this is the part of the poem in green. He licks their hands, he's silent by them, and stands. Very, very similar to the way that the lion reacts when it sees Leica in the first poem. Protective, nurturing, silent, looking. That's about as threatening as this gets. It looks at them. And it's interesting how the fact that the lion behaves differently to their anticipation of the lion leads to the parents changing the way that they see him and therefore changing the way that they experience him. Blake draws our attention again to the idea of seeing through the fact that it's the eyes of the lion that the parents look at. And suddenly they see him as a spirit armed in gold, Their fear is dissipated. They undergo, if you like here, a vision, a new way of seeing, a sort of a moment of revelation, if you like, as they relearn through accepting that nature can be benign, can be loving, can be protective. They relearn their way of seeing the world. So in the final part of the poem, we can compare how the parents now see the lion with how Leica saw the lion in The Little Girl Lost, which I've included on the right here. And you can see that this idea of royalty created through the semantic field of lexes such as kingly, crown, palace, golden, unites both poems, as the parents' perception of the lion is united with the way that Leica also would see the lion and how we are taught to see the lion in the first poem. It's interesting how the evaporation of the parents' fear is conveyed in one simple line, which in itself is a complete sentence. Gone was all their care. The simplicity of that perhaps suggesting that this truth is, it might not be an easy truth to learn, but once you've learnt it, the world seems much more simple. The parents follow the lion then to find Leica. And in the penultimate stanza, the lexis lion is replaced by the noun vision, where the vision led. Perhaps this is Blake reminding us that the lion was only ever a symbol rather than an actual lion. So the poem ends with the parents joining Leica in the world of innocence, in Eden, if you like, with the animals. And the final emphasis of the poem is their lack of fear, nor fear the wolfish howl, nor the lion's growl. It's fear, then, perhaps Blake is suggesting, which corrupts how we see the world. So some final thoughts then on the poem. And remember, this is just my interpretation. It's not the truth about the poem. There'll be plenty other ways of seeing the poem as well. But for me, we have then adults learning from children. So very much in the romantic tradition, the child is the figure of inspiration from which the adult learns. In both poems we have nature as strong, protective and loving. Once it is seen neutrally, obviously when it's seen from the initial perspective of the parents, it's not seen in that way. But once nature is allowed to behave independently of the parents' perspective, this is how it is presented. We have Blake suggesting to us that fear is something which limits and corrupts us. Leica was never lost, and therefore she cannot ever really be found. But what Leica gains is a re-entry into the world of innocence, something which perhaps fear that we learn as we grow older removes us further and further from. We have, as mentioned in the first poem, some strong Christian allusions, with perhaps that lion being seen as a godlike or Christ-like figure who can, perhaps through our renewal of our relationship with God, allow us to re-know the natural world and our natural selves. And we have the idea of seeing as central to both poems. The idea of seeing emphasised through the actual lexis itself, with numerous references to eyes and looking and seeing and viewing, but also thematically introduced through the idea of the parents relearning how to see the world and therefore re-experiencing the world in a completely different way. And then connecting this to the idea of Blake being a political poet, the idea that we need to be able to see differently, to develop our sense of imagination in order to imagine other ways of being, in order to change the world.